reduce my overwhelm, I have to decide what the first next things are. Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. So here's my story. I learned something really cool, and I have not yet Googled as to like why the thing is, so we could just make up our own reasons to sort of round out the metaphor. And I'm not even sure where this metaphor goes in business, but I feel strongly that we will find one. So
can I make up my own statistics to go up with our reasoning?
Of course. Isn't that what statistics are for?
That's what I thought.
There was a joke I saw a while back that said, did you know that 62.4% of statistics are made up on the spot? But all right. So here is my story. I think I told you I've been taking this circus lyra class.
Yes.
It's like a circus arts class. And there's this circle that they call a lyra that you do like acrobatic circle things are. And when I say you do acrobatic circle things, it's like you are learning the things that you would need to do. It's not like I'm being well, a little bit. I'm every now and then they teach us something that I'm like, look at me, I'm doing a circus thing. But it's actually more a great deal of like, hey, I can't even do the beginning part of that thing. I have to build up muscle. Anyway, they taught us a thing last week where you were learning how to do spins, basically. So you're holding onto the lyra and they teach you how to like sort of roll on this one toe, and you end up doing these spins almost like I imagine it feels for ice skaters when they do those, like they twist into the bring up tall and they're round and round and round. So it was really cool. And I got it. It was like the one thing in class that day. And I really needed that boost at that point. It was right towards the end that I actually could do. And I felt like I did well. And it was really exciting. So I just spun and spun and spun and spun and spun. I was like, look at me. And when I stopped, I was a level of dizzy that I have never experienced before in my life. Because I know when you do like dance things, you're supposed to do this, like close your eyes and flip your head fast or whatever. I don't know if there's a technique for that for like circus lyra. I probably just should have my eyes closed. I don't know. But I was standing there holding on to this lyra for dear life, standing perfectly still on 2 feet, because had I let go of the lyra, I would have just crumpled to the ground because I could not, it wasn't even spinning left to right. It was also spinning top to bottom, like at the same time. Like I couldn't even begin to get a grasp on any kind of verticality. And she said, because we were learning this, she goes, and if you get dizzy, don't forget, just stomp really hard with each of your feet, like boom, 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 as hard as you can with your feet. And in my mind, I'm like, that's stupid. There's no way that helps. But I did it and it did. So I am like ragingly dizzy. I stomp like a couple of times and boom, the dizzy is gone. And I'm sure there's something really, really basic about it. It gives your body like a really clear frame of reference for where gravity is and how to like reorient in the world. But that kind of reset when you were that out of kilter about like where to go and what to do and how to even just stand up without crumpling to the ground, I just thought was fascinating.
Now, there are a couple of things that occurred to me. The first thing is, of course, that your entire professional life revolves around enabling people to see clarity, and your story involves the one thing you were good at is spinning in circles. So I like that, but that's not the point.
I am so, let's be honest. I am the queen of spinning in circles. That's why I'm such a fan of having like third parties to help you get clear. And it's probably the point to the story somewhere in here is I am masterful at spinning in circles.
And I do like those little like body hacks. For example, if you've been in a Zoom meeting or any time, but in a Zoom meeting, it's worse. If you feel a sneeze coming on and you haven't quite gotten there yet, so you're just on the verge of a sneeze. What I'm told, and I've tried it and it actually worked the one time I tried it, if you press your tongue very hard up against the roof of your mouth, it eliminates the urge to sneeze. So I thought that was
okay. It would have to be a really important meeting for me to give up the joy of a sneeze. But
no, if it's just not,
I don't care. I could be talking to like, I don't know, name the most famous person. I can't think of a thing that I'd be just like, hold on a second, I'm going to enjoy this sneeze. I really like sneezing, so whatever.
Okay. But what I do think is interesting about this is the focus on the one thing physically. Like if you stomp on the feet, the one thing is where the floor is, gravity and all that stuff. So you're reminding yourself of that. They train people if you're in an avalanche and you're tossed all around, et cetera, and you find yourself just buried in a lot of difficulty that arises from trying to escape, is that you're not sure where up is.
Oh my God, I never thought about that. And now I'm a little distracted by how terrifying that must be.
Right. So you're not sure where up is. So what I've read is that you try and clear a little bit of space and you just spit, because the one thing is gravity.
Huh.
Right. So where down is.
Oh, wow.
You can figure that out. And so I would think that the same thing holds true with your experience, which is your brain is whirling and you can't get a fix on balance, and all the fluid in your inner ear is just going all over the place. And so you can't really orient yourself. And so you remind yourself forcefully with the one thing
Yes. Yes. And that's and it's not like I wasn't at all still a little bit dizzy, but 90% of it went away. And then then my body could like get about dealing with the amount of dizzy that was left over. So I think that is what it is. It probably gives you one thing to ground on, like spitting and stomping.
Yes.
Maybe that's what this episode should be called. I know, spitting and stomping. So spitting and stomping are both ways that in a moment when you are completely disoriented of how to find your thing. And I think there's a tiny bit of a preamble, because to sort of round this out into the business metaphor of it or life metaphor of it is, in both those cases, you do not need to notice that you are disoriented. Like it's like there was no avoiding for me that I was disoriented. I imagine it very similar to that feeling of the avalanche. Is I honestly I couldn't get a grip on anything about what was right. Now, obviously, if I thought about it, I could have I was hanging on this thing. I could have sensed that, that letting myself kind of where gravity was, but we didn't get that far. I think a lot of times in business and in life, we aren't as aware. Like we can feel that we're spinning. I'm not sure we always are as glaringly aware that we need some kind of foot stomp or spit. we know we're spinning. I'm not sure we realize how disoriented we are. And one of the ways I've seen that come up, especially lately, more in the past couple months than I have ever, although I used to see instances of this before, but now I'm seeing it a lot, where there's just too many different things to be feeling worried about. I talked to someone who, and we've touched on this before, not only is dealing with the pandemic and the economy and how they feel about politics, but then also they're having a major health concern, or their marriage or their partnership was having issue, or one of their children is having a major issue. All of those things can just create this swirl of overwhelm. And when people feel that way, they can't not feel like they have to work on all those things because they all feel so important. Whereas some kind of, or to me, that feels like when I'm hearing somebody in that state, it's as if when I had finished spinning on that lyra, I had just tried to walk across the room. And I'm here to say that would not have gone well. Probably would have been hysterical to watch, but it would not have been pleasant. So noticing that you're disoriented and spinning in too many directions. And then if you notice it, what are the ways that you stomp, the proverbial stomping your feet or spitting to find your gravity?
Right. I mean, so, and the one other illustration that I'll give, and this is, I don't know if this is true in real life, but I can tell you that I read about it, so it has to be true. Especially
Did
since
you read it on the internet?
I did not read it on the
Oh,
internet. I read it in a James Clavell novel called Noble House, and they were talking about a Soviet torture, which
oh,
was putting people in this room where it was not a parallelogram, so the walls weren't square; they were sloped or whatever, and there was furniture that was adhered to the ceiling, so it looked like there was a table and chairs and a book open, and one of the walls had water, but it was being pumped the other way. So it was like flowing up. And they
so
said
the torture was disorientation?
the torture was disorientation. It said you couldn't stay sane in that room for more than an hour. You just had to get out. And it was the whole notion. I remember it so clearly, even though I read the book decades ago, because the torture of disorientation was so visceral to me, because I could see that.
Well, I could see it being disorienting, but it's fascinating to me that it rises to the level of torture. I could see it being like, oh, this is like being in a fun house. But after a while, I could. If
you can't escape it and the physical sensations that go along with that, just take a look. If you've been in a situation, you had mentioned business overwhelm. If you feel just so bombarded and so unable to get your bearings, how much mental and psychological weight that places on you. And if you can't escape it, and I think that's our point, what's the stomping and spitting? How do you get yourself out of that? And I made some notes, because for some people, I think, for me, certainly, the way that I reorient, if I'm feeling overwhelmed and I have all these different projects and I'm worried or going into some sort of spiral, what I make a point to do is, and certainly pre-COVID, is sit down for coffee with somebody. But
that's interesting.
there are certain people that I know that, whether they're old friends from, sixth grade or whatever it is, or whether they're just people that I like getting together with or will distract me, or I'm really interested in what they're doing. But there are people where they, just being in their presence, I can take a mental pause and it allows me to get my bearings. It's like stomping. It stops all the sensory overload, and I can just focus there. And for some people, it's in the midst of overwhelm and all the other stimuli, that thing that you do at work amidst all of your work tasks that gets you in flow. It might be that you're just really good at this, or you just want to focus on this one thing. And for like, sometimes I hear echoes of that when you talk about getting into making a spreadsheet, because you, at least my perception,
I find them very soothing.
You do. So I can see you getting into a flow. So I'm kind of curious, if you had felt just overwhelmed and you allowed yourself a respite from that feeling, geez, if I'm spending time on this, I can't spend time on all the other priorities. And you allowed yourself, like some people do puzzles, but you allowed yourself to start getting into a spreadsheet. If that is your stomp on the floor mentally,
if so, which it could be, I've never deployed that as like in the way that you seek someone out for coffee. I've never been like, I'm going to go make a spreadsheet. It's like rocking in the corner, making spreadsheets.
I hope you do that. Actually, I hope, not only do I hope you do that, but I hope you announce it to Paul in just that voice.
I have to go make a spreadsheet. if it is, like, I would officially be the biggest nerd on the planet of like, my calm down strategy is a spreadsheet. But it is definitely work that, I find that there are times where I have to balance out work that I have where there is nothing orienting about it. Everything about the business that the client's in, the situations they're currently navigating. Part of what I love about the work that I do is that there are no pre-planned maps, and that we're having to like figure out things that I won't say no one has ever had to figure out, but they're just not like, even if someone else has had the same problem, they're in a different industry or they have a different set of circumstances.
It's not cookie cutter.
It's not cookie cutter. And I love that, but I can get topped out on that. And then I will find this, like, I need to retreat into work that has finite answers that, I like. Part of what I like about spreadsheets is that two things. There is a stomp on the floor aspect of spreadsheets where you take a lot of like blur of data. And whether it's because you create a pivot table or whatever it is, you can create order from the chaos. You can be like, oh, here's a pattern. Here's what we're doing. Here's where we're spending this money, or here's how this is, or what's causing that thing. So you can, make the invisible visible. And so that takes chaos or disorientation and makes it a little bit more, takes some of the dizziness out of it and makes it a little bit more clear. I also like that it's finite. Like when you're, it's a different kind of thing, but when you finish a thing and you get a 0 at the end, when something balances out, you know that it's done, versus with so much of the other work that I do, there is no done. You could always do more or try more or think more. And so a lot of the challenge is just discerning which things you do and which things you leave to the side. And it's just a different texture. So yeah, I could see that. I've never tried it for Overwhelm though, necessarily.
But I'll do another example is mind maps. I like putting together mind maps for a lot of disparate things. And because you can make order out of the chaos and you can focus on one point. Like my understanding, and this I'm drawing on my extensive experience in ballet, as you well know, my understanding is that when doing the spins, it's not necessarily closing your eyes, but it's focusing on a point and then whipping your head around during the spin.
That is correct.
The point. And so that's what I'm really thinking about, is whether it's the stomp or the spit or the focus, you're able to narrow your perception to that one thing.
Yes.
And then that's where you get your bearings.
It is. And I just thought of another part of this metaphor. See, I was worried it wouldn't go anywhere. And now I can think of like so much stuff that there's the part, I think the danger of disorientation and wheel spinning and whatnot, it links over to the part of the metaphor that is what happens in your inner ear. There's the disorientation from the actual spinning where you are literally spinning, but there's an after effect. There's a hangover or ripple effect or whatever of you're done spinning and yet you are still experiencing the disorientation. It keeps going afterwards. And so that like residual disorientation is I think, sometimes what we miss in how disorienting. I want to go back through, like, how many times did we say disorienting in this episode? But so I think finding ways to like reset that. For me, I have to, whether it's a spreadsheet or whether I have to find some way to categorize things out. And usually for me to stomp my feet when I feel overwhelmed, it has to be something written. Like and I get frustrated with written to-do lists or, any kind of like mapping things on a wall, because you can't then sort them by different variables, because sometimes I want to look at things by the category of whether they're the household things or work things or podcast things or me things or whatever. So sometimes I want to see it that way.
So, it would be great if you could write something somewhere and be able to sort it by columns, depending
like
on
in a spreadsheet. But no, that's the
spreadsheet.
Well, I know. But here's the funny thing. When I am overwhelmed, that doesn't help me. Like I could put it all in a spreadsheet and have columns for categorizations. Something about it doesn't make me feel better. So this is, if I have different pieces of paper, and here's what I've found. I don't think I've ever told anybody about this. I found this, it sort of works if I have like different, because I have those giant stickies where I could have like different stickies for different things. And again, it doesn't work as to take the next steps where I need to look at things different ways. But just to reduce my overwhelm, I need to find, this is what it is. To reduce my overwhelm, I have to decide what the first next things are. And that's the value of the stomp, is it doesn't solve everything, but it just gives you that hint of, like the avalanche. Spitting doesn't get you out of the snow. It just tells you which direction to dig. And so when I'm super overwhelmed, ultimately I need to be able to sort by different columns, literally or figuratively, to do a bunch of the other steps. But to get out of overwhelm, I have to just even figure out which way to dig. And for that, I have to do something handwritten. I have to do something where I I make these sort of like bigger stacks. And sometimes the big stickies where I can write on works, but for some reason that I've never been able to figure out, I have found huge value in using clipboards with like 2 or 3 pieces of paper, because I'll have a clipboard for sort of each category of my life. And then I'll have 2 or 3 sheets of paper, and the front page is like the holy crap, you have to deal with this stuff because there's like a deadline or it's behind or, there's something wrong. And then there's sort of the later version of this. Oh, and I sure would like to make sure the kids learn a second language or whatever. And I need to brain dump it, but I don't want that on the same visual paint. So I'll put that on like the second or third sheet. And that's
because there's something that makes sense about having a reference point that is, especially when the weight or the disorientation is psychological, having a reference point in the physical, because it's a different area of the brain. It's similar to how you rehearse a performance, so you can learn the words on the script, but very often it's helpful to pair those words with a physical action. So I'm going to stage right as I say this, or
that's interesting.
Come upstage, because your brain associates it. It's another building block in the brain to help remind you that this is the part that I'm starting with these words and I'm moving here. It's muscle memory. I think that applies to the clipboard. I think that the physical manifestation applies to the avalanche and to spinning. And it kind of reminds me that, there is no such thing as level without a reference point. And in the physical world, biologically, when we talk about the inner ear, it's all a matter of fluid mechanics, right? So that if you tilt your head, the fluid is always going to stay level.
Right.
Your head might tilt, but the fluid stays level. And in overwhelm psychologically, or in the physical manifestations of it, you've gotten to the point where the fluid is not level, and it doesn't know where level is because there's no reference point.
Yeah.
So the exercise is to provide yourself with a reference point. And if that's stomping, or if that's clipboards, you have, or if it's stage right, you have a physical reference point that kind of, I think, grounds you psychologically.
Yeah. And I think in business, a lot of times you might not have a physical reference, although if you can, I think that's fantastic. But I think where I really see that also mapping over is in terms of like checking back into the bigger purpose or the why, or like what's important about this thing. Like a lot of times when I'm facilitating a conversation, for instance, I have a client who is taking an idea from another company he has seen in the world on the internets that he wants to implement himself. He's using it slightly differently, and he has a slightly different business model, but he's trying to take the parts that work and map it over to his. And he, over and over again, and like I said, if it was my conversation, I would totally be doing this, but I have the benefit of being like that outside person watching it, so I can notice that he does this, because I would do it if I were him. Because he's looking at this other person's thing as a template to work with, he keeps getting sucked into thinking about, worrying about things that they worried about for their business. He's like, well, but we'd have to solve for that. I was like, no, don't forget, you're doing it just to solve this problem. You don't have to map over everything they do and then worry about things that you don't even want. Like, you don't want leads that also want that other thing. He's like, yeah, but that's how they're getting. I'm like, yeah, but you don't want those leads. So it's okay to only get people who only want this thing and it might be less people, but that's all you want. You don't want those other things. And that's that, because we kept getting, every time I felt like, and when that happens, it does feel like overwhelm. The conversation starts to feel like this snowball that's bounding down a hill with more and more and more and more and more things to worry about and think about and problems to solve. And we're like, wait. What is the purpose of this thing? And what do we not need to worry about?
Well, and I think that you're right. There's something about being, to be psychologically grounded and be able to remind yourself of the purpose or the mission or the values or whatever is bedrock to you. On the physical side, I do think that's why there's a value in, corporate retreats, actually going somewhere else. I think frankly, I was thinking about when you were talking, I was thinking about, well, that's why I'm talking to you from my office and why I started coming in 5 days a week, because there's a physical part for me to being grounded. I'm here at the office. And so it helps me focus on work. If I'm home, I'm not as focused. And I think that's one of the problems in our era now, where it's Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting and you're in your bedroom and all that. I do think that there's a physical part of this that helps us get grounded, that helps us form a reference point that you have to compensate for because it's not necessarily there.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's a thread going in the Facebook group right now that's talking about.
Where's that Facebook group, by the way?
You can find your way to the Facebook group. If you look us up on Facebook, on our page for So Here's My Story page, there's a link to join the group. It's also called the SHMS Podcast Community. If you want to look up the group directly, you can also find that link, I believe, on our new website at sohere'smystory.com.
So what's the conversation going on?
We started a conversation about how people are dealing with that physical blur of work to home and whatnot. And there's, we have several people who are chiming in with some of their distinct issues. I'm hoping to get into some of the, like, what can you do about that? But you definitely see how some of these things are really, they're universal. A lot of us are dealing with this, like, what are your foot stomps and spits?
And that's going to be our title.
I think it somehow has to be. But there was one more thing I wanted to say about that. While I try and think of it, I will say, if it's not too, I think it's only like, I have a video of me spinning on the Lyra, and it's really, really dark and grainy, so it may not come, but I will plop that in the Facebook group. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to plop in the Facebook group today and be like, guess what this episode is about?
And if Christy wants to, she can look through the interwebs and see if she can find all of the footage of my ballet years.
Okay. We could alternatively call the episode Elliot in a Tutu.
It might also be dark and grainy. Just
the euphemism.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us. Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.